So, you guys all know who I am. Maybe we should just go around just to have everyone introduce themselves, just since we're such a small group. Just get to know each other. Eric, you can start?
Absolutely. I'm Eric Rubin. I'm the director of business development and engagement networks. I also opened our West Coast office based out of Oakland. So if anyone's ever out in the Bay Area, say hi. Yeah, I'm very excited to get this deep dive into the roadmap.
Who's next?
Solution, and we talk all the time about how to make our data integrated and make the clients happy. Happy to be here. Was I supposed to say anything else? I'm a Leo. I like long walks on the
That's enough right there. Yeah, that's good. We're good.
Hi everyone, I'm Romain Petrinek. I work at Ocean Conservancy and I'm director of digital fundraising. And I've been with OC for the last year. I believe OC has been working with Engaging Network for the last 3 years or so.
I'm Jeff Zick with PETA, and I'm the Senior Manager of Direct Response, so oversee all the online and offline fundraising.
I'm Brian. I'm the Director of Business Development at Beacon Fire Red, and we do web development and digital marketing and fundraising.
I'm Brenna Holmes. I'm the VP of Digital at UCAH. Like Beacon Fire Red, we do direct response, fundraising and marketing for nonprofit clients. We're also a multi-channel firm, so we work with Roy and a lot of other CRMs on the direct mail and phone side of things too, bringing it all together.
I'm John Simatowski. I'm the sales engineer for Engaging Networks. New features in the product are my life, that's why I'm in this session.
I'm Gabby Green. I'm from Humane Society International, and I manage our email marketing program. I think we've been with EN for like 8 years or something.
Well, way more than that.
Oh,
Yeah, 2005.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, you guys, there was when they had the annual SEALs campaign, and Heather was still working at HSI, so it's like, I remember it was like 2005, so yeah. You're like great grandparents or something, I don't know, whatever, yeah.
I'm Sarah Ferguson. I'm a project manager at Cornershop Creative. We designed Engaging Network's beautiful new site. We are also a partner organization, which it just should be partner person. I'm the only one that's gotten through it. But we're a digital services company, so kind of whatever nonprofits or nonprofit service companies need on the internet, we probably do it.
I'm Kim Everett. I'm with Surrey Group, and we are also an accredited partner, and I think Jake might be the only one that's been through it, but it's on my list of to-do list. And we do kind of everything. We're a full-service consulting company, so we do everything from technical solutions consulting to strategic services, and I am the director of client success, so in my group we primarily support Engaging Networks.
I'm Brian. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Engaging Networks. I recently marked my 5th year with the company.
Really? Wow, okay. That's why I can go rock climbing. Matt, do you want to introduce yourself since we missed you?
So I'm Matt Barr. I'm the Director of Operations and Delivery at EB Digital. So like we're in Cornershop, we're an accredited partner agency with Engaging Networks. Essentially we design, build, create strategy and planning for websites, digital marketing strategies, that type of thing, to help grow online revenue for charities.
And we should, by the way, they have a really cool name, Yibu. I'm Canadian, and so Eric Rubidoux, I think his ancestry were Métis, weren't they? So in Manitoba, Canada, they have, the French started having families and with Native North American Indian tribes, and so they have this group that they call the Métis, or the Métis, but they call it the Métis locally. And Ibu in French is actually an owl, but the Métis actually pronounced it Yibu. And so actually it relates to the heritage of Eric Rubidoux, which is why it's called Yibu Digital, and they have an owl beside it, because that's how the Métis actually used to pronounce Yibu instead of in sort of classic French. They would sort of have it in this unique dialect, and I love that story. So there you go.
Describe that a little bit than Eric.
But Eric's own heritage is
Yeah.
Métis, isn't it?
Métis.
Yeah. So there you go. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit more of a conversational session. I'm going to pull up 3 different documents. I'm going to go through some of these slides that I already went through in the roadmap, but a portion of the keynote. But I'm also going to go through what I call our product journal, and I'm going to show you that, so you guys get like a sneak peek into the product journal. I'm sorry. Did you want to introduce yourself as well? Are you from PETA as well, or no? I'm sorry. Did you want to introduce yourself? I'm sorry.
Sure, absolutely. Sorry to join late. I'm Nikki. I'm from Beacon Fire Red.
Right.
I work with Brian over here.
Yep. Okay. Fantastic. Now I think that's everyone. Close the door, because okay. So it'll be a little bit conversational. I'm going to talk about how we, sort things out and how we kind of develop our roadmap and how things kind of progress throughout the year. Because I think it's important for you to know that we don't actually just sort of sit around in a room for 10 minutes and then work this out and then kind of stand outside. It's a very dynamic process. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about the major things that we're focusing on this year. But I'm actually going to pull up the product journal, which is a working document that I use with the technology group to really prioritize what's getting released and so on and so forth. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is how do we come up with a roadmap. So I think that there's a lot of competition in this process. There are organizations that are looking for specific types of either if it's like a feature for an existing module within the software, or maybe looking for a new module altogether. Or maybe just some sort of enhancement, so not a new feature, but just trying to change the way that we actually work something within the application already. And so I would say that the biggest sort of funnel of information into deciding what we need to be doing every year comes from our clients. So if you do have suggestions and you do think that there's things that could work differently, et cetera, I want to set expectations, but we actually really want to hear from you. So if you do have suggestions and you do have things that you think that we should be working on, please tell us. And then that does get logged into a process through a series of JIRA tickets that we create, and so on and so forth. The reason I want to set expectations is, of course, it is a competitive process. And we also have to decide commercially for us what is the most logical way for us to kind of move our platform over the next sort of 12 to 18 months. So we need to be thinking about changes perhaps in or trends in technology, things like machine learning. Clients never came to us and said, hey, why don't you guys start a machine learning program within Engaging Networks? So we have our own kind of global view of what we think is happening in the landscape, whether it's in payment processing, data integration, what's happening with competitors, what's happening in terms of driving trends. We never want to be so far ahead of those trends that basically we're producing stuff that's never going to get used. That's happened in the past, and then by the time people do start using them, it's out of date and you have to rebuild them anyway. So we always try and get that balance right of essentially trying to accumulate the input from organizations that are using the platform, because you guys know best the kind of things that you need for your everyday workflows, the kind of things that you're working with. But by the same token, us looking at commercially what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening in digital trends and technology, and that kind of all gets mushed together. There's essentially like a big list of everything, and I put it into what I call a product journal. They're logged individually in something called JIRA, which is our internal tracking system, but actually I prefer to see everything in a Word file. So I create literally this just Word file where I list everything by different categories that people have suggested we prioritize and do, that we internally have come up with, things that we want to change. So for example, this year, we have an admin console. You guys never see it. It's what our teams use to be able to set up your accounts, establish permissions, do this, do that, do whatever. It really hasn't changed in about 8 years, and it needs a major overhaul. And that's really boring for you guys because it's actually going to be a little bit resource intensive, but we have to do it. We got to get it done. And so, adding a payment gateway, we're loath to add payment gateways. The reason that we're loath to add payment gateways is we then have to maintain them. So every time that we actually release then technology, we now have to do QA cycles against yet another payment gateway to make sure that everything is happening properly with that new payment gateway. So people think, oh, it's like a 2-week integration. Forget it. It's actually a huge ongoing commitment that we have to now spend both in terms of development time and also in terms of QA. So I know that sometimes people will ask us to add another payment gateway thinking, oh, it's just like a little 2-week integration. It isn't. It's a massive piece of overhead that we now have to carry with us every time that we release any technology. So we kind of get into this process where we do this full list and then we make these decisions. We also know that the process itself is very dynamic. So you'll get into something and you'll go, oh crap, this is like way more complicated than we ever expected. And like the Twilio integration, for example, presented a whole series of problems because the way that their APIs work for click-to-call meant that we actually have to now create client accounts within our master account in Twilio for you so that that doesn't become a burden on you. But then how they actually manage the amount of money that's being spent, how we give you an opportunity to cap the amount of money you're spending on click-to-call, all became this, okay, how do we do this now? So now we had to find all the APIs to be able to figure out at 50% of a cap budget, when do we go to, when do we send out an email? Do we do one at 60%, 70%, 80%? What's the process within our dashboard for actually setting those caps? I mean, and that's one of those things where you just kind of go, like honestly. So, you kind of get into these things and all of a sudden you find that you've got a cycle where things are taking longer or things are happening more quickly than you expected. And so now you can kind of like chuck more stuff in, smaller features, but you're always cognizant of making sure that you've got the QA cycles at the end that will find stuff that needs to be fixed. And so, and then you've also got people who are working front end, HTML, CSS guys that are building stuff in the dashboard using data services to connect to basically a Java backend. And some of the data services that we're using, what rolls up to reporting, what rolls up to here. And so sometimes you'll also see that we're grouping things together, which might not logically make sense to you, but actually we know in the back end it makes absolute sense for us to do these things at the same time. So it's a very complicated, very dynamic process that requires a huge amount of just every week continuous attention and focused discussion to kind of look at features and make sure that we're kind of managing this process in the best way possible. Does that make sense? I think I've kind of described like a really big mess, but it isn't. It's just there's just like literally dozens of moving parts that need to be kind of always sort of fitted together. And then based on what you fit together, you now have to pick up all the other pieces and decide, okay, where are they now and what do we have to do? So when I talked in Page Builder about like that aggregate tool for messaging, for advocacy, that's probably something that we're going to push to the very last cycle of the year. For the reason that it's probably not going to get that much uptake. It's not going to be useful for North American clients. So we're going to strategically decide to deprioritize that. And if we get to it, great. And if we don't, it gets pushed into 2020, so be it. Some clients are asking for it, but we have to be rational. Like we have to be a little bit cold about this and make sure that we're doing things that are going to benefit most clients most of the time. The other thing I would say is that when clients, organizations recommend stuff to us, our basic distinction is this something that they want specifically for them because they want this to work this way and they just don't like the way that it works, but like 80 other clients are perfectly happy with the way it works, then we will also say, we're not going to go and change something unless we can see that there's like a general benefit actually in what they're suggesting does make absolute sense. And I would say that 80 or 90% of the stuff that we get from clients is in fact generally applicable and it's just a really good idea. And so I'm always super excited about the feedback that we get because it's always something which I know is generally speaking going to improve the platform for everybody and not be so specific as really to only benefit one or a small group of organizations. And we, again, we really do feel that we're stewarding your subscription income. So we need to make sure that we're kind of doing the right things and making the right kinds of decisions. Okay, yeah, okay. So that's just kind of like a bit of an overview in terms of what we do to manage our technology. As I talked to you earlier about technical debt, Like the asset libraries is a classic example. We could have looked at the asset libraries last year and just gone, okay, let's just change the appearance of this and tweak this and do a few other small changes just so that it works a little bit better. But instead, we just basically ripped it down and said, you know what, this is not good. The technology's not good. It's not very efficient. We want to do different things with it. We want to integrate more editors. We want to do whatever. So you know what? Crash it, start again, build it up. That's how you avoid technical debt. There's some pages that were built on the new interface that we have. And like, for example, where you set permission groups and things like that, those are one of the very first things that we did on the new interface, which is now probably getting close to 3 years. So we've come up with a lot of really new innovative ways of integrating front-end design and back-end using a variety of services. So we're going to go back to those pages, for example, this year and update them. And you're going to go, well, that didn't really change my life. But actually, it will make things a little bit easier. But it is an important thing for us to do, to basically go back to that, tear it down, use the new infrastructure that we're using, because it makes sense for us to do that. And again, you guys don't see a lot of that, but that's going on in the background, and it does cost a lot of technical resource. But you know what? It's totally worth doing, because then everything else that we do going forward becomes more efficient, more time efficient, and essentially allows us to push out more technology. So sometimes you have to do it. Sometimes it's a pain in the ass because you have to pause. But and no one sees anything. So everyone's like, what are you doing? Whatever. But actually, it's going on. Reporting. So reporting I do want to talk about, because reporting, this is one of those areas where we can come up with an interface and think about the appropriate filters, for example, to display reporting in the dashboard or to create a downloadable report. Do you guys use the downloadable report for email, for ROI for email? We didn't come up with that. That wasn't ours. A client said, here's what I have to give my management every month, and I want to know what the average number of clicks, cost per click, whatever it was. I mean, they're like revenue per valid email, blah, blah, blah. They had a whole series of metrics, and we built that out into an Excel spreadsheet that they could then download as a report. We've had another organization propose, for example, comparative reporting, that they want to show this quarter, for example, versus the same quarter in the previous 12-month period. And they want to have certain specific types of metrics. And so they've actually sent us a copy of the report that they want to be able to have. And so the difference is obviously fundamentally between a report that you're just generating to view online, so you can kind of see that information and maybe print it, have it emailed to you. We've created the infrastructure for that 2 years ago. But then the downloadable reports are the ones that I think that clients find really, really helpful. So what do we do for an advocacy report? And this is where we're at a huge disadvantage, because we actually you're the guys who actually have to come up with these reports for your management, for your teams, and be able to show people things. And so we're going to send out an email asking you to tell us and actually give us a report, either a downloadable report or the kind of features that you need in filtering a displayed report within the dashboard, because we want to build the right reports. And we can build anything. We can display this information in a downloadable report or online in any way that makes sense. But we really want this to be a community-driven function, more so than any others. Just because we think it's an intelligent report doesn't actually mean that anyone else does. So if you guys have specific reporting requirements, either for the reports you want to be able to view and construct dynamically online, versus ones that you want to have emailed to you as a downloadable report with all the essential aggregated metrics, send them to me, because I want to know what they are, because that's how this is going to work. This is not going to happen, sadly, before June. It's probably going to be in the summer release. So we're going to have an offsite meeting to go through all this stuff in early spring. So around the time of the April release. The June release is going to be focusing a little bit on some of the preliminary machine learning stuff. So the reporting stuff probably won't go until sometime in like late July, early August. So it's not for the first 6 months of the year, it's the beginning of the second half of the year. because we still have a lot of work to do on this. We still have to figure out what it is we're going to report. Some of the reports that we want to build might actually involve also database changes in the back end, because we aggregate a lot of information in the database. And if you want to filter certain types of information, it may be that we're not actually storing it in the way that you need it. And we don't pull any data from transactional tables. Everything comes out of reporting tables, because if you try, we have billions of rows in transactional tables. You can't report off transactional data tables. You have to be able to aggregate that into separate tables. Oracle's not really good at that. Oracle is a great transactional database, but it's not really good for things like reporting. Same thing for machine learning. Oracle is actually not that good. So please, 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 please tell us, let me know exactly what you want to see as a report that can be filtered. So ideally send me, here's the kind, if maybe you have one that you've built, and you've said, actually, you know what, I have to build these by exporting the data from engaging networks. Can you just kind of like generate it for me? Great, send it to me. And let me know basically what you needed to filter or some notes and explanations. And we're gonna assimilate all that information together and then come up with a list and start building this out. Make sense? Questions? Who's gonna write to me? Are you gonna, okay, Brenna, okay. Put your hand down, Brenna. Okay. All right. Again, page builder, we're not really going to do anything. So this is the thing I mentioned to you, which we're deprioritizing. So you're not going to see aggregated messaging until the end of the year if you see it. The other thing I should mention is that that last cycle of the year, the last sprint that we're doing, typically actually doesn't release until January of the following year. So the February release was actually included a ton of stuff that we were doing in November, December. The reason we do that is because we freeze our code before year-end fundraising. As a result of that, stuff that we actually have, we never release in December, we never release in November. We always push it. We might release early November, but then a lot of that stuff typically gets pushed back into January. So this is going to be deprioritized. And so you're very unlikely to see any other really dramatic changes in terms of new page types to page builder. There's a lot of other stuff you'll see, but in terms of new page types, the survey is the one thing that we felt was missing as a tool that a lot of clients would have been telling us they would like to use. The membership has been moved over. That was the last pre-existing page type. We were thinking about, for example, on e-commerce to go from symbolic giving to actual physical gifts. The amount of work involved in doing that to accommodate shipping, inventory, and everything else is one that, again, we're going to deprioritize because we don't think we're going to get a huge amount of uptake. Most of the demand that we've been getting for e-commerce is for symbolic giving. So there's some things that we're going to do with symbolic giving in terms of, we're going to make some changes to receipting and a few other things. But basically, the idea is that the survey will be the most significant new page type that we're going to release this year. So you're not going to see us, again, building out like another 6 different, I mean, I'm not even sure what we'd build, to be honest. What would you build? Actually, I should ask you. If we could build another page type in Page Builder to do something different, what would it be? Yep.
Question about the survey, will that include kind of like quiz type things where you can actually select an answer and say whether it's right or wrong? Because I know that's something we have.
So I'm not 100% sure. It's actually in this cycle. So it's happening now. I can check for you and let you know. And if it's not, then it's probably not too late for us to get it in because the release is not going to be until April. So yeah. Okay. Yeah, I like that.
Second that. That's a big
Quiz. Okay. And do you guys just is it just email goes out? People are asked to like take a quiz and. Okay, cool. Yeah, I like that idea.
I don't think the functionality would change, but also using it on Facebook, social, things like that, right? So not just promoted via email, but anywhere online.
Yeah, okay.
And like a vanity URL, trying to get people online from offline.
Okay, very cool.
use ads primarily to try to get people we don't have emails for.
And so it's like a quiz, like that's your clickbait basically. Okay. Sorry. So yeah, and so what people are like, they have to guess, and then you just reveal an answer or something. I don't know if that would be logical to do as within survey, or whether it would make sense to do it as a separate kind of like little page type. It wouldn't be, obviously it wouldn't be a huge lift for us. Because it's not really extending page builder functionality into an area it's not already in. Like, it's all stuff that we're doing. Like the biggest pain in the ass about survey is reporting it, right? Is being able to aggregate the information. The actual technology to build a survey, the dynamic stuff in terms of like exposing questions, et cetera. The way that we're doing surveys, we're not going to use standard questions. There's going to be a separate series of questions you're going to create specifically for surveys. And then you'll be able to pull like a survey question block into a page and then manage essentially any dynamic behavior between those questions. But it's the reporting side of it, which is obviously the more onerous thing, because obviously we have to now adjust like how that appears within our reporting dashboard. And that's the other pain in the ass, is that we're going to pull this into our reporting dashboard. I think what we'll probably end up doing is maybe trying to do it as a quick report within Page Builder, but where you got your page list. But here, we're talking about basically trying to update dashboard reporting, but we're going to have to probably add survey reports before we do that. And so we're going to have to build stuff into technology that we're about to rip down. So, but that happens. So, yeah. Doesn't make me very happy, but it does happen. But thank you for the suggestion. It's great. I'll ask them. I think it might end up, just thinking about it, like in terms of, if you ask the question, do you then just provide like a graphic response of the number of people that answered? You provide the right answer and then presumably show the number of people that have guessed A, B, C, or D, or whatever. Is that it?
Yeah. I feel like it's like a factual quiz, like, what if there's, I don't know, something, and then there is like a correct answer, and it's testing your knowledge of like a certain animal.
Yeah.
Something like that. The way that we've kind of done it to like break the system now is just you give the questions and then the user can like check their answers on the thank you page or something.
Right.
But like that's not what people expect.
Yeah, that's a hack. Yeah, for sure.
So you use a field validator to validate that the response is correct, and then customize that message that needs to be done.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay.
Oh, great. So we don't have to build it now? Yeah, I think, but do you want to actually display then the aggregate number of people who have answered each question or something, and make it a little more interesting? Or
Maybe, that'd be cool.
yeah, because if you're doing it, we might as well do it. So yeah. Okay, so yeah, I mean, there's other stuff, like I talked about gift designation, but that's not a new page type. That's just building functionality into, for example, donation pages within engaging networks. And there's a lot of other stuff that we're going to be doing within Page Builder. Some of the membership stuff, for example, we want to build that out a little bit more, even though it's live now. So we're going to keep doing that kind of stuff. It's not as though we're not touching it, but we're just not building, apart from the Survey Now quiz, we're not going to really build new page types, just because we don't think that there's a whole lot out there beyond what we've already got that we need to build. So we'd rather focus on kind of improving whatever it is we've got. And so again, aggregated advocacy messages is something which is going to get deprioritized. Questions? Okay. So the hub is something where we kind of got it out. It works. The original genesis for the hub, for those of you who know it, was the idea that you wanted to have a recurring donor manage their gift, right? So they wanted to update their address information, change their credit card, do whatever. That was the original idea that we had a lot of requests from organizations to add within engaging networks. But we thought, well, if you're going to drive someone to a page where they have to log in, we don't actually have a password login. We actually just have put your email address here, we're sending you an email, and then just click through the email and we log you in. So we created kind of like, the Medium blog site, for example. They work the same way, because quite frankly, unless you're doing two-factor authentication, if your password's been stolen, or if someone's stolen the password to your email account and it's hacked anyway, whether or not you actually go in and reset your password or don't, doesn't make any difference. You're still going to lose it. So the idea was, since it wasn't any weaker security, but actually easier just to sort of immediately send out an email to someone that they can just then click through, that's the way we do it, like the magic link, the magic URL. But we thought, well, if they're there, isn't there an opportunity to kind of create this as their kind of engagement page, like they're almost like a page summarizing their history with your organization, in terms of their single gifts and their recurring gifts. And we didn't want to build out a whole site with navigation and like CMS functionality and everything else. So what we did was we built essentially a single page that someone could click into a gadget, like on fundraising, advocacy, you know, whatever. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take stock of where we are in terms of numbers of organizations using the hub. We know that there's some improvements that they would like to see to the hub, but the real overall idea is to look at like what happens if you gamify, for example, participation in certain advocacy campaigns, or if you reach certain donor levels and you want to reward individual supporters for reaching a certain type of donor level. I talked earlier about things it already does, like for example, when you go into the fundraising gadget, if someone's already a single donor, it's just going to, but not a recurring donor, it's going to offer them an opportunity to upgrade to becoming a monthly donor. So there's some basic stuff that we're already doing in these gadgets, but I just really feel that the hub has a lot more potential to be built out now to create a better engagement tool, probably for that 10-15% of your supporter base that are actually that committed and that interested that they're going to go and do it. The other 80%, or whatever, 85%, probably won't use it because they're making a single gift once a year and they're not all that bothered by it. They might read your newsletter a couple times, they might sign a petition, but they don't really want to kind of go in and do stuff or whatever. I think that also begs the question about strategy. Like if you have this, fine, but if you don't have the digital strategy to actually leverage it with a specific objective, then you're not likely to be successful. So I think it's like peer-to-peer. If you're going into a peer-to-peer program, great, you got to have good strategy and good implementation for peer-to-peer. You can't just say, oh, I have a peer-to-peer function out there now so that I can have people go and raise money by building a page. There has to be some thought behind that. So the hub is, I think, one of those really kind of early stage gems, really, which I think has a huge amount of potential to become a better place to engage supporters. And again, especially those most critical supporters that are already most engaged and would take a lot of pleasure from seeing their level of commitment, like you're in the top 10% of it's like when I do a review on TripAdvisor, I'm one of the top 10% of the people reviewing on TripAdvisor, or I was, in Bethesda. I'm like, okay, so that doesn't actually make me feel very special, but in the US, sure, Bethesda, whatever. But the idea is that they're trying to encourage me to obviously put in more reviews. They obviously give you badges if you put in a certain number of reviews. You can qualify yourself as a certain type of reviewer. So that idea of kind of gamifying an individual process or a relationship is something which obviously a lot of organizations try to do. And so I think that there's the opportunity to really use the hub more effectively. And so we're going to be taking a look at the gadgets that are there, going through it, and then thinking about new opportunities, whether it's local organizing, more gamification, updates, et cetera, et cetera. But we're also going to take a critical look at who's already using it and talk to those organizations as well. Thoughts? Yeah.
Is there any sort of reporting on it to show, X% of your constituency are using the hub and perhaps
It's a
how
great
frequently
question.
or what they're doing when they're there?
I don't know. I don't think so. But that would be very cool to show. Yeah. How many gifts? I think, and you would know this, I'm not sure if, for example, a gift comes out of a hub gadget, whether that comes as a separate transaction type or whether it just comes as a standard kind of.
I don't think any of our clients are currently using it, but
Okay.
I believe from Dan it would be just a normal transaction.
See, that's where the mistake is, because we can't report against it unless we know it's actually a hub transaction versus, whatever. Okay, that's a good suggestion, actually. Yep.
Just a lot of the newer folks who are in the process of signing up to become Engaging Networks clients have big plans for using the hub, and it's become a major selling point. But then we have clients who are more incumbent, like Amnesty International America, USA, who have long ago built their own version of this using outside developers, and so there's less of an impetus for them to switch. Although I think over time that they may change their mind because this will make it much easier.
Yep. It's true.
Any of the supported field updates will write an HSU transaction, so you can tell from that who's updating. If they've done a donation, you might be able to put a field code in there to then signify that I think for the
I suspect there's a flag somewhere that we're catching, but I don't know. But I'd need to work that out, because in order to drive the reporting, we'd have to be able to actually, make sure that we can identify whatever activity is logged in via the hub, and just make sure that we're outputting that in a specific way. Even if we're not outputting it, that internally that we know that that transaction was flagged as, whatever. So you guys, Clinton, you're taking notes, right? Okay. Okay, so there's a lot more that we'd like to do with the hub. And it's, again, we've put out some good basic infrastructure, and we've done a few things with it, but I think there's a lot more potential. And again, the machine learning integration is another opportunity where you might not necessarily know what you want to suggest to put in various gadgets, but I think, again, you can now use machine learning as an opportunity to potentially have individual supporters do things that are recommended through an algorithm and a specific use case run through the machine learning. Click to call. So this has been released, so I don't need to talk to this about 2019. I mean, this is out and up and running. I think Save the Children is probably the first, right, to actually to start using it. I don't know when they're going to go live with their campaign and start it working, but oh, really? Okay, cool. Well, that's great. So click to call. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but basically it's the idea that obviously you can go out and have someone call an individual, whether that's their local representative or somebody else, and it's done through an auto dial process. So essentially when you say, yeah, call now, the actual call is made to the politician's office that's being targeted, and then the supporter's telephone rings, obviously, when they're connected straight through to the representative's office. There's an opportunity for you to propose a script, for example, and give supporters, ideas about what they should be saying and, the kind of points you want them to make, et cetera. And then there's also kind of a wrap-up page where they can provide some input on, okay, what happened during your call? Did you get through? Was it, unanswered? I think there's another screen for that. So basically, you're going to be shortly connected with Justin Trudeau, who I've taken rock climbing, by the way, when he was 19 years old with his father. So then you can kind of do some feedback. This is from some design comps, so I don't know if this actually changed a little bit between this and production, but basically that's the idea. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's going to be a lot of interest in being able to use this technology. And we'll see how that goes. I think that, again, the neat thing about this is that we did this integration with Twilio, which is all the the telephony, mobile / telephony stuff. The great thing about that is that we now have this infrastructure with the APIs with Twilio built out. So that's why we can use it for things like text messaging through marketing automation channels, because we now have this engine we can now leverage for a lot of other stuff that goes on. Yep. You know what? Great question. I have no clue. That's one of those details that I just prefer not to shove in my head. I think.
They're not using a lot of voice over IP. They're actually using a lot of.
I think it's your line. I think your phone actually rings. Yeah. So I think your mobile phone, your host phone, whatever number they have for you, basically will ring. 6 minutes?
15.
How many? 15. Oh, I get it. Okay. I was doing math.
You were adding.
Yeah, I was adding. I was kind of going, yeah.
15 minutes, I already know.
Thanks for your discretion.
You're welcome. I'll get size next week.
So yeah, I'm pretty sure Twilio is basically it's not voice over IP for your computer. I suspect that could have been an option, but I think most people prefer to do it just like actually having a telephone call, having the number dialed. So marketing automation, again, a lot of things that we want to keep improving on this. One of the ones that I just mentioned is obviously the SMS integration. This gets a little bit tricky because if you send someone a text message, the only way that you can, I think, probably measure the response is if they're clicking through to actually a page that you provide them in the message, which we can then record because it's a page that we're hosting. So the whole premise of the marketing automation is that you have decision points with pauses, and then based on whatever actions happen at that decision point, you then have another action that can be taken. Not one, but it could be one of several based on whatever happened at that decision point. So someone opened the email, someone didn't open the email, someone clicked through the email but didn't complete the page, someone completed the page, someone did whatever. So now do this or do this or do this. So it's actually a very sophisticated tool already, but we want to say, well, okay, you know what? If someone didn't open the first 2 emails, and this would be your decision, or if someone didn't open this email or did open the email but didn't click through, send them a text message, to their phone number. We now have to work out whether that's a valid option, because we may not have their phone number, right? So now we have to decide. So you guys are saying, here's the decision tree that I want, based on 100% of assumption that you actually have a phone number for everybody that you can actually send a text message to. So also, is it a phone number which is a landline, or is it actually a mobile phone? So when you start pulling this apart, it starts getting complicated super fast. And then you also now say, okay, well, if someone actually now if we're going to send that SMS because we know they have a mobile phone number, what's the response to that? With email, it's pretty simple. We know if they opened it, we know if they clicked, we know if they actually went to the landing page and they completed that page. With SMS text messaging, for example, the outcome of their response to that text message is much harder to gauge, because we know it can be delivered, but we don't know if they looked at it, they didn't look at it, whatever. So what happens so there's a lot more stuff when you add in different channels, which becomes slightly more complicated. And so we're thinking very carefully now about how we can actually do this in a way which doesn't overcomplicate the UI, but at the same time is very logical and sensible, because we now have to validate things like mobile phone, et cetera, whether it failed, so on and so forth. So this sadly gets complicated fast, but we're sorting through that now. Again, qualifying people for specific workflows. There was like if/or statements that a lot of organizations wanted to use. So it was right now set up in a way which leveraged profiles, which is what it should do. But we essentially wanted to be able to create a slightly more sophisticated query tool to be able to qualify people for audiences. That's going in this release. Greenpeace International has been asking for that for a few months, and we think it's one of those things, again, which makes sense for everybody. So it's kind of like, yeah, we should definitely do this. And we're very committed to making sure that this stays cutting edge. So we're constantly improving it. And then again, new templates for workflows. So we have some for like birthday now, or whatever, failed recurring gift or whatever. We have a few, but we're going to start creating a few more templates, so that you don't have to go through and do all that kind of, build the query and do this and do that. So you can just say, yeah, this is the template and it's the one I want to use. And because of the template you've chosen, we automatically know what audience you're trying to reach, and so we can kind of go through it and do it in a much more efficient way for you. So marketing automation. Questions? Yes?
So is the SMS or any kind of text-to-give functionality going to be available outside of the marketing automation?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we've thought about, is obviously text to give, just being able to actually respond back. And that, of course, adds a whole other layer of complication. So I think that we would probably, in the first instance, maybe just try and do it in a way that would go through to a landing page where they could complete the page, because at least now we have some control over that data. But we're going to look at other options where we can have text to give vendors, for example, but that have APIs to be able to feed that information back to us. So that will happen, but it's probably not going to happen in the first release.
I get asked about it all the time.
Yeah.
And no, to my knowledge, I don't think any of your competitors has it
No.
integrated, so it would be
Yeah.
a pretty good differentiator.
Yep. Yeah. Well, that's definitely going to cause a few headaches, but yeah. Yeah.
If it was easy, everyone would be doing it, right?
Well, exactly. Well, and it's one of those things where, you're committed, that last slide at my keynote about product sophistication but ease of use. You can make technology as sophisticated as you want it to be, but if you literally need now a degree in computer science to be able to figure out how to set it up, then you're not really helping anybody. And so it's one of the things that we struggle with is providing that level of sophistication, but with the ease of use on the front end. So but that's what we're committed to doing. So, any other questions on this? Because this is an important part. Again, we're not trying to build anything. We're not trying to build a new marketing automation tool. We're just trying to build more features into something that we already have. So geolocation. Geolocation, this is another one of those tools where the idea initially was to build something where you can select an audience for an outbound email, but actually geolocation has a lot of potential uses within the application. So we're building it as kind of like a generic kind of engine within the software. The most classic use is where you can drop a pin, for example, on a map and say, identify the radius, and then either just pull it out or identify it, and do multiple areas to be able to accumulate individual constituent records. This, for example, involves us identifying the latitude, longitude for every single one of your constituent records. We know that within Roy, you guys already store that data, so for a lot of clients, they'll be able to go in and essentially back populate all the lat-long data they have for existing supporters into engaging networks. If you guys don't have that data, the first thing that we have to do is actually make sure that your data has that latitude, longitude for their residential address. And that's a whole process in itself. You'll be able to upload it and use an external service, or you can use a service that we will provide, but unfortunately it will come at a cost. It's a relatively, it's not that expensive, but in order to populate that data, we can't back populate it because it's just a net cost to us. So we have to basically pass that on to you. But once that's done, the only thing that we will then do is now populate the lat long using a lookup service at no charge to you for new records as they come in, or an updated record. So if someone, for example, updates a field within their constituent record that we know is an address field, then we know that we have to update the lat long, or at least validate it or check it. If it's a new record, we have to add it. The only issue that we've come across is being able to run your data to be able to back populate it, all the existing records. But once we have a latitude and longitude, that gives you the potential now to integrate with things like these mapping tools that can say, yep, I want to select an audience for an email for everybody who's within this watershed of a particular area, or in this location where there's a puppy shelter, that's a puppy mill or whatever, and you want to get everyone around there locally doing something very specific or whatever. So the initial release will only include the actual radius mapping, as well as if you want to just do things like select like a city or whatever. The problem with things like city is that you're now basically selecting everybody who, based on their constituent record, has that city listed as their city address. And so I think the mapping idea of this is actually going to be more effective than even just like trying to pull in a constituency or a district or whatever, but you'll still have the option for doing both. So you'll be able to identify a district or an area based on, we've already mapped your records against districts, against political districts for the advocacy tool, but if you just want to say, Greater Toronto or whatever, Greater Portland, we have to figure out, well, do we have a point of reference to identify the geographic area, which is Greater Portland, and therefore have the longitude, latitude to be able to fit within that? So again, this is one of those tools that gets complicated really fast, but I think that there's the potential for this for things like local organizing, being able to data map, for example, participation in various campaigns, build widgets for that, use it for the hub to be able to associate individuals with other people within similar areas, et cetera, that have obviously agreed to share that information. So I think that this whole geolocation tool is fantastic because it's going to open up a lot of opportunities to build much higher value add features within a lot of areas within the software, not just for a selection, for example, for an outbound email. Yep.
Graham, I don't know if you already mentioned this and I missed it, but is it zip code based or?
If you said you want to do it zip code based, as long as, this is one of the things that Anna's working on. So Anna leads our data team. So if you said, for example, Greater Toronto or something else, or a zip code, if you said everyone within this zip code, because we're using latitude and longitude, we have to now know what the boundary set is for that zip code based on longitude and latitude. So it actually needs to be mapped out so that we can actually find everyone who lives within it.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? If you wanted to say zip code area today, you could look up your database and just filter for everyone whose zip code equals whatever, right? Or this zip code or that, whatever. So we're not trying to replicate that process. What we're trying to do is provide a more sophisticated service that's going to allow you to take things like boundary sets but they need to be mapped in order to be able to work with the lot line. That's why I'm saying that we're taking an approach of building this, which would help us to build something which is much more universally applicable to other areas in the software where we can use this kind of technology. But if you today wanted to figure out who lives in a particular zip code to send them an email,
Right, yeah, that's easy.
you can do that.
That's what I was curious about, if there was, IP address was something that being factored in, since a huge portion of our people on file, we don't have zip codes or anything else.
See, an IP address is a little freaky too, because I mean, you can look up someone's IP address and, were they just there on a train when they were taking part in your petition, or is that actually where they live? And so now are you now mapping a whole bunch of people that you think live in a particular area based on their IP address, but actually 20% of them, were not there. And so, again, all these things get tricky really fast. But I think that ideally what you want to do is, store a latitude, longitude for every single record based on a physical address. And what happens, you might say, you know what, I'm willing to take that chance that actually IP address is going to be wrong 10% of the time, or 15% of the time, or 50% of the time. But another organization is going to say, I'm not doing that, only on physical address. Now we have to come up with a way that allows you to do what you want and the other organizations to do what they want in terms of actually, relying on the validity of that latitude, longitude. So it gets, again, this is one of those things that gets complicated really fast. And that's probably not the answer you wanted, but so we try and work through this, and that's also, by the way, one of the reasons that we never really just consult with a single client about a feature. We try and make sure that we talk to a variety of organizations who can say, hey, what about this and what about that, and whatever. Yep.
Question about the universal applicability in the way that you're building this. Are you thinking along the lines of actually using this as a front-end user use as well?
Yep.
So, advocacy actions,
Yep.
seeing people in your local community you've taken and stuff like
Correct.
that. Sort of operators or-
Correct. Yep. Absolutely. 100%. Peer-to-peer is a great example. And as I was saying, things like display widgets, being able to show, for example, where people have taken actions and being able to do that in a way which is, again, geographically located. So, yeah, that's why I was saying is that, the initial request was, hey, we'd like to have a geolocation tool where we can actually mobilize a specific group of supporters for something specific. But if you're building the technology, build it in such a way that you can now use it in 12 different ways within the functionality, because this has huge applicability in a lot of different ways. And the only way that we could actually go down that route was to use a basic latitude, longitude tool, because it works well with mapping, but also means that we can now use it in all these other ways, but we're no longer relying specifically on constituent-based information within the record. We're basically using that to get a latitude and longitude, so now it can be used in a whole variety of different ways. Yep.
Event-based targeting.
Yeah.
Like we're wherever we are, whatever this address is, and you want to find people who are within 5 miles, 5 kilometers. Could you also in the application, if you looked up the address, get the latitude, longitude, and then just input it to say this is my focal, this is my center? Because you wouldn't necessarily have the World Trade Center as a constituent in your database.
But you should be able, so
You could just drop a pin.
you just drop a pin and then just say, okay, so it would effectively do the same thing, but just doing it via a map. So,
I think through data, so
yeah.
No, makes sense.
So this we're also going to do, but actually physically drawing on a map turned out to be like nightmarishly complicated. So rather than actually pushing this back by 6 weeks or 8 weeks because we can't get this done, we're going to do a phase 1 release. That's the other thing that we'll often do, is we'll actually push something out which has a good use case, can be used, it's solid, but that might not have all the features, but we want to get it out because we want to make sure it's accessible for organizations to use. But then we'll actually add additional features. And apparently Ben wants me to stop talking. So I'm not going to go back over this list, but donor designations, again, I've kind of got to wrap this up. But this I talked about in the keynote. And the machine learning, I don't have time to do machine learning in less than 30 seconds. But again, I'll just show this slide quickly. because again, like we've had a lot of requests for things like sharing options within pages that include like WhatsApp, HTML editing, as I mentioned earlier, as well as things like social sharing icons and thank you emails. So these are the kind of things where we've had just suggestions from clients who have said, hey, it'd be nice if we had this and whatever. Great, we agree 100%. And you know what? Every single client's going to benefit from these things because they're going to be able to create opportunities for their content to be shared more easily through a variety of a larger number of channels. And so this is the kind of thing that we do. That's the old logo. Kathy's not in the room, we're okay. And I'll just end on the machine learning, just a very quick note. I'll do a webinar on the machine learning specifically, but the potential of this, and again, June is now the target to be able to release one use case based on classifications. But we will be, and thank you to HSI because Paulie has actually been super helpful in contributing all this information for us to be able to kind of do the analytics and kind of look at, so that thing about 40% longer retention for recurring donors if they remain involved in activism is actually your data. But it's been great because we've been doing analytics. And so what we need now, though, is we need a wider range of organizations to start pushing that data in to see if behaviors and patterns change. And so we're going to be reaching out to each of you to see whether or not you would like to contribute information, your data. It's all anonymized, so we don't care who it is. There's basically a hashed version of someone's email address or their Oracle ID, which goes in, which ties the data together. But actually, there's none of this we don't need their physical address. I think we have country and maybe state or whatever that we retain. But that's it. Everything else is basically completely anonymized. So. But this I'm very excited about because it's, I don't think anyone else is even close to doing what we're doing in terms of the sophistication of this program. So we're very excited about getting this out in June of this year. Who's excited? Yay! I'm exhausted. Okay, so listen, I hope that was helpful. I'm sorry I didn't show you the product journal as I promised to. Yeah, I mean, machine learning, there'll be a notice coming out for a webinar, which you can join to get a bit more of a deep dive into the machine learning. And if you guys want to be able to actually, have us put your data into the machine learning models, just let me know. Just send me an email and let me know. And we will add the anonymized information and keep going. So anyway, so I'm excited. It's going to be a big year as usual. And I thank you for all your support. Thank you for suggestions. Thanks for always proposing stuff because we love it. And you guys are the best partners in the world. So thank you.